Manila, capital city of the Philippines, where 1 out of every 7 Filipinos lives. Manila is a city of high-rise hotels, gleaming office towers, the base in the Pacific for multinational corporations. It is home port for this island nation on the South China Sea. This is another side of Manila. It's called Smoky Mountain, the largest dump in the city of 8 million, where trash is always on fire. But this is much more than a dump. It is home to thousands of Filipinos who have no other place to call home. It was hard for me to comprehend the poverty of a place like Smoky Mountain. To see the children, their stomachs bloated from malnutrition. The children with no clothes that play amidst the garbage, the flies, the open sewers.
It's a very poor area, probably the worst that I've ever seen. And the people here, they pick through the garbage to get whatever they can recycle to sell, to get enough money to eat.
As the bulldozers level the next wave of garbage from Manila, the people of Smoky Mountain get to work, the only work most people have. And the children, the little kids, walking through the heat and smoke, clawing for a piece of metal or a string of old wire. This boy helps his brother so he won't burn his feet on the burning garbage.
During the rainy season especially, there's a lot of disease amongst the children especially.
What kind of things do they suffer from?
Cholera, typhoid, tuberculosis.
Several years ago, the government bulldozed this slum and moved the people out. But they came back. They couldn't find other places to live. This 18-year-old girl cuts up rice sacks for 50 cents a day to feed her 2 children. Why does she live here? She says, I am here because I lost my house. My parents-in-law had to leave. We couldn't afford the rent anymore. This man has lived at Smoky for the last 8 years, even though he has a job as a security guard. And you have to live here?
Yeah.
You don't have enough money to live anywhere else?
Yeah.
On the day we visited this place, thousands of pro-Marcos supporters were marching to a rally in central Manila. The people of Smoky Mountain looked on, watching the campaign, but thinking of the terrible poverty that is their lives. Many people, both in the Philippines and here in the United States, blame the poverty on President Marcos, his wife Imelda, and their cronies. They are accused of stealing billions of dollars from the people. Congressman Stephen Solars of New York.
I personally have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that the President and First Lady of the Philippines have invested hundreds of millions of dollars in real estate in New York City and to some extent elsewhere throughout the country.
Congressman Solars has begun to document his charge that the Marcoses and their business partners have taken some $10 billion out of the country to build their real estate empire of office towers in Manhattan and estates in the countryside. Back in the islands, the First Lady, Imelda Marcos, spends millions more building shrines to house the country's culture and art. Across the street, families live on the islands between the roadways. They see the Marcos and Aquino campaigns whizzing by, and they wonder. February 7th, Election Day. For millions of Filipinos who live in this kind of poverty, it is just another day. If Marcos wins, if Aquino wins, their lives will change very little, unless the next government undertakes drastic economic reforms and tackles the severe issues of human neglect. Supporters of President Marcos, convinced he'll be re-elected, say he will bring change.
When a person is at the last end of a long term, he cast his sight already in history and the impelling motivation to do good for the country. And so I perceive that the next 6 years will be characterized by exciting development and changes.
But the Aquino campaign, sure of enormous grassroots support and victory in a fair vote, feel President Marcos will take the election through fraud. And if that happens, former advisor to the Philippine government, Russell Moran, feels this will be the result.
If he steals the election, to put it very baldly, then I think you can expect in the United States there's going to be very, very severe demands for curtailment of military aid to the Philippines. If that happens, he has no choice, I suppose. He wants to stay in power, but to further repress the people. But this time he'll be repressing them with their own money, right off their backs.
Now, just to give you an idea of how much money this country gives the Philippines, we found out through our Washington Bureau and the Philippine Consulate here in San Francisco that last year we gave the Marcos government $250 million in economic assistance and in military aid. Good evening, everyone. In less than an hour, Philippine President Corazon Aquino will board a plane bound for Manila, a midnight flight that will end her victorious visit to the U.S. She chose to spend this last day with the people of the Bay Area and her last appearance at Moscone Center with those who love her most. Tonight, outside Moscone, hundreds of Filipinos gathered to greet their president. And the large pro-Marcos protest that was predicted never happened, though there was plenty of screaming. The SFPD maintained order as the president arrived with her entourage. Inside Moscone, the president was almost back home. 4,000 Filipino Americans came to welcome her on the last leg of her 8-day visit to the U.S.
You took to your streets, you held your own rallies, you let the world know your beliefs.
Tonight, President Aquino spoke to her countrymen of freedom, of democracy, of the dictatorship they overthrew, and the Bay Area Filipino community expressed love for the woman they consider a true heroine. And tonight, she asked them for help in rebuilding her impoverished nation.
You can help by investing in your mother country some of the wealth you have earned and accumulated in your adopted country.
She also asked Filipino Americans to become active in American politics to gain clout in Washington for the Philippines. Those who heard her message tonight took it to heart.
I think she's great. You know, I'm just ecstatic that she is unifying the Filipino community.
She makes me cry. She's great. She's a great role model for all of us second generation Filipino American born.
And tonight, many of Aquino's ministers are staying behind in the Bay Area to follow up on the president's request for financial aid.
At dinner at Moscone.
It was a time when darkness descended over mankind as a shadow blocks the light of the sun. Adolf Hitler's Nazis passed a death sentence on the Jews in the quest for a perfect Aryan race. The Germans set up an elite force, the SS, their mission, Judenrein, to make Europe free of Jews. The SS, brutal in their methods, rounded up the Jews, sent them to ghettos, humiliated, starved, tortured them, and murdered them if they protested. The terrorized Jews were promised food for work if they went to labor camps. When they arrived, most were sent to gas chambers, the remains of their bodies used to enrich the German nation. By the time the horror ended, 6 million Jews from a dozen nations had perished in the final solution. A minority of the German people actually participated in the slaughter of the Jews of Europe. A majority acquiesced. They turned the other way. They didn't want to know. But there were a few courageous Germans who risked their lives in the name of humanity and justice. One of those people was Herman Graby of San Francisco.
There are different ways to kill people, different ways.
Herman Graby is 86 years old, weakened by 18 heart attacks. 45 years ago, he was an engineer building railroad lines for the German war effort against the Russians. While working in the Ukraine, Graby discovered the other German war, the war against the Jews.
They had to go down the pit. The pit was designed so the people had to lay this way, not straight, this way. And on the side of the pit were steps so they could go down. And there was one man, The hele machine gun here, and he was a good shooter.
This is how they were exterminating the Jews in the East. Hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children all sent to a horrible death.
And they shoot and killing naked people, even out of the hospital. And so I said, something should be done. Something should be done. So that was the beginning.
Reverend Doug Hunneke of Tiburon spent years researching and writing a book about Graby's efforts to save the Jews.
He used all of his engineering skills to build a rescue network that was almost unprecedented in the war. He kept moving Jewish people east, bringing them onto his labor crews and then getting them out of the reach of the mobile killing units and the Gestapo and the militia.
Maria Borojo, a Polish refugee, was one of those saved by Mr. Graby. We talked to her via our New Star satellite in Miami, Florida. Maria, when you think of what Mr. Graby did in the Ukraine during the war, what comes to mind?
Whatever he was doing was strictly illegal, extremely dangerous, and by that I mean he could lose his life, his family life, and he had a wife and a son, because he had to fake the whole thing. And against him was a very, very mighty country with intelligence, police, all apparatus.
Graby had only his spirit and courage as weapons. He used his position building railroads for the Reich to scare off the SS.
He had a trick. He would look straight in the eyes of an SS commander and he would say, "My orders come from the highest offices in Berlin." And they'd be scared to death. And then he would say to them, "My report to Berlin will show whether you cooperated or hindered my effort."
In the village of Rovno in the Ukraine, Graby used that tactic to save 113 Jews from the death pits. He marched them with pistol in hand in front of SS troops.
That night, one of the German soldiers who had witnessed this, a command officer, not just a soldier, saw Graby walk into the tavern, turned to him and derisively pointed and laughed and said, "Ah, here comes the Moses of Rovno leading his Jews." To Graby, that was a term of honor, to be compared to Moses.
No one knows the exact number, but Graby saved several hundred Jews from death. After the war was over, Graby was the only German to testify at the Nuremberg War Crime Tribunal. In 1965, Graby returned to his hometown in Germany. What did the people think of you when you went back to Zolligan?
Traitor. Clearly a traitor.
If Graby's own people couldn't find pride in his efforts to save innocent people, the nation of Israel did. He was given the honor of lighting the eternal flame at the Holocaust Memorial at Yad Vashem. He was also honored by the Jewish community of San Francisco and former Mayor George Moscone. To the people Graby saved, like Maria Bobro, who lost her husband, mother, and father in the Holocaust, Graby is a hero, a man who knew his own life meant nothing unless he did his duty to mankind.
It took me a long time to believe that one person can be so heroic, so unaware of being heroic. I feel that there should be some way that he should be put as an example of a tremendous moral courage.
I asked Mr. Graby why he took such risks. He told me about the young boy standing next to the death pits with his father, and his father pointed toward the heavens, knowing their fate, and Mr. Graby said, "What else could I do?" My thanks to Jim Joy for an always masterful job of editing. Emerald?
Thank you, Jim. That's quite a story. And does he regard himself as a hero?
No, he really feels that that's what people should have done, that the barbarism of the time shouldn't have occurred, and that everyone should have been standing behind innocent people and not allowing that to go on.
That's remarkable. Thank you.
And now let's switch to Jim Paymar for more on the story live at New York Harbor. Jim?
Well, Lila, the birthday bash for America on her 210th birthday rolls on tonight from New York Harbor. You know, 17 million immigrants sailed by the Statue of Liberty over the years en route to Ellis Island, seeking a new lease on life, including my two grandfathers. One man I know back in San Francisco who happens to be my barber is part of a new wave of immigrants who are also seeking freedom in America.
All right.
Goodbye.
Okay.
Huh?
Arteen Sarkisian leaves his fashionable split-level home in Millbrae every day, a happy man. He used to live in a mud hut in Baghdad, Iraq. No electricity. A hole in the floor was the bathroom.
Very, very poor. My father was a shepherd. He was illiterate.
Art was headed for the same fate, pulled out of school in the 3rd grade to help his family of 9. But today, he starts up his shiny gold $45,000 Mercedes-Benz and heads for work in San Francisco and his barber shop.
When I started dreaming about America, I was about 15, 14 years old. Well, when I was 29 years old, that the dream come true.
On his way to work, he stops off at his 6-unit townhouse building to make sure everything is all right.
When I decided to come to America, that was my motivation, to be a rich man, a free man and a rich man.
And Art Sarkisian achieved that goal by cutting hair, saving his money, and investing. When Art arrived at Kennedy Airport in '63, the first thing he did was go see the Statue of Liberty.
There is no words to describe really the feeling about Statue of Liberty. It meant freedom. For the first thing, it's really freedom. You are free. You know, you speak your mind. You express your feelings. You talk politics.
From New York, he headed west, eventually settling into his first home in San Francisco, and he had unwelcome neighbors.
Sharing the attics with the cockroaches and with the mice and rats, that was not as pleasant.
But he went to work, doing jobs no one else would do. Eventually, he got his barber's license and later his own shop in the Cathedral Hill Hotel.
Well, I have accomplished everything that I want. Everything that I have said I will do it, and I have done it. From cars, from homes, from buildings. You know, I have enough for my children, 2 of them, for me to retire and live very comfortably.
But beyond the material things he attained, gaining citizenship in America was his biggest reward.
Once I left the federal building, I was pounding on the sidewalk. I said, this is mine. Nobody can take it from me.
And Art has little patience with those who were born here and say life is too tough.
Here a guy like myself to come without writing his own name, without speaking, and made it so good and so big. What are the excuses to those people that they blame the country, they blame the government on their failures?
Time for the bad news.
All right, all right. Jim, this is a dream come true, you know. Here I am sitting down here writing a check for you when I couldn't write my name.
That's right.
This is America.
And there's your money.
Thanks, America. Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Very good. This is Stanley Noodleman, a San Bruno doctor. Like 30,000 other healthcare professionals, he's a member of a peace group called Physicians for Social Responsibility.
We feel that the continual escalation of the nuclear arms race is ultimately going to lead to nuclear war. There's no way to keep building up these weapons without eventually using them. So we're for bilateral, verifiable, negotiated arms agreements between the superpowers.
PSR is generally considered a mainstream, even conservative part of the peace movement. Members include some of the most respected doctors in the country, like Jonas Salk, inventor of the polio vaccine. All agree that nuclear war would be the ultimate catastrophe. They have one other thing in common as well. On and off for the past 17 years, the FBI has been spying on their group.
Well, I don't like it. It has overtones of political harassment that I think is inappropriate for the federal government and especially the FBI.
Congressman Don Edwards of San Jose is a former FBI agent who heads a House committee that oversees Bureau activities.
The ordinary citizen in America ought to be very indignant. This is what happened during the Vietnam War, when those in opposition to the Vietnam War were put under surveillance by the military intelligence, the FBI, and perhaps even by the CIA.
That was an era when the federal government infiltrated and disrupted lots of political groups, especially the anti-war movement. That caused such an uproar that the FBI dramatically cut back surveillance of political groups during the late 1970s, and new restrictions were placed on the Bureau. According to these internal FBI documents obtained by News Center 4, the Bureau appears to have conducted one investigation of PSR that ended in the 1970s. But in 1982, the FBI began keeping tabs on PSR again. The big question today is who ordered that investigation and why. Congressman Don Edwards and others have one theory. It has to do with PSR's support of a freeze on nuclear weapons, a position held by thousands of Americans and over 200 members of Congress, but which the administration strongly opposes. In fact, President Reagan has suggested the freeze movement is directed from Moscow.
They were demonstrating in behalf of a movement that has swept across our country that I think is inspired by not the sincere, honest people who want peace, but by some who want the weakening of America and so are manipulating many honest and sincere people.
That claim is discounted by government intelligence experts, including the FBI. And Congressman Edwards suggests domestic politics, not communist spies, may be at the root of PSR's problems.
And just because they happen to disagree with the president about some issue that he feels very strongly about, it doesn't mean that he can tell the FBI, now investigate them.
I'd call it the FBI exercising good judgment in the defense of American security.
John Reese is a journalist who gathers information on political groups. He is paid in part by the John Birch Society, and he is one of the sources cited in the FBI investigation.
PSR have their agenda, which is, unfortunately, one that parallels that of the Soviet Union.
That's totally inaccurate. The best information probably you can get about PSR was an excellent article that was in Time magazine, which showed basically what we believe and what we stand for. We're totally against the policies of both superpowers.
The government apparently has been suspicious about Reese's credibility for years. This Secret Service memo says the Chicago police found Reese to be, quote, unreliable and a former con man. And the Village Voice says a 1968 memo by the FBI says almost the same thing. If that's true, there are obviously some serious questions about the FBI investigation. But perhaps a more important question is, how significant has government surveillance been of the peace movement in the 1980s? News Center 4 has learned PSR was not alone. This used to be the San Francisco headquarters of a group known as Jobs with Peace. In 1983, counterintelligence agents of the FBI paid this group a visit. At the time, they said it was just an isolated incident. But News Center 4 has learned it was part of a national investigation. Rich Cosby was one of the volunteers questioned by the agents.
It bothers me that they could be intimidating the entire movement that is against many of the policies of the Reagan administration.
News Center 4 contacted both the White House and the FBI concerning the investigations. Neither would comment directly about them. However, an FBI spokesman did say the Bureau has an obligation to investigate foreign intelligence agents and, quote, does not go on fishing expeditions for the White House.
I don't have any more evidence than we have in the Freedom of Information file that you people, to your credit, have dug up. But we are going to make some further inquiries because it's deeply disturbing to the subcommittee of the House Judiciary Committee with jurisdiction over the FBI.
The entire movement that is against many of the policies of the Reagan administration.
News Center 4 contacted both the White House and the FBI concerning the investigations. Neither would comment directly about them. However, an FBI spokesman did say the Bureau has an obligation to investigate foreign intelligence agents and, quote, does not go on fishing expeditions for the White House.
I don't have any more evidence than we have in the Freedom of Information file that you people, to your credit, have dug up. But we are going to make some further inquiries because it's deeply disturbing to the subcommittee of the House Judiciary Committee with jurisdiction over the FBI.